Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Usually, toys are fun. I mean, even as adults, we find the joy in them, or at least understand the joy they bring. What they aren't supposed to be is creepy. Moreover, they aren't supposed to move on their own, talk on their own. They're just supposed to be toys, objects that we manipulate to do things, not the other way around. It's quite unsettling when things that aren't supposed to be alive act alive. What do you do in that situation? I wouldn't know how to answer that since I've never been in one, but maybe the authors of tonight's stories have a better idea. So, let's get started, shall we? I grew up in a house with a dark past. We moved in when I was perhaps 4 years old. There was a concrete ramp leading to the door, and this was for a disabled man who used to live there. Unfortunately, he died when he got too close to the nearby river. He fell in, couldn't get out, and drowned. That story always scared me as a kid, even more so when my mom said that she once fell asleep downstairs and dreamt that she saw a man in a wheelchair watching her. Part of me was convinced it wasn't a dream. Anyway, on to some stories. The room at the front of the house was haunted. This was my bedroom. I saw and heard a lot. My wardrobe rocked for no reason when I was nowhere near it. Logic tells me perhaps it was sitting on a wonky floorboard and slipped. But I was sitting on my bed. My cat was with me. I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, and I turned to look. My cat looked too. There was nothing there. My bed moved when I was sitting on it. Again, I try to logically explain this as it's not sitting on the floor right, so it slipped. I think my radio made a noise when it wasn't plugged in, or when I wasn't near it, but I can't be sure if this was real or a dream. My memory's patchy on that one. Our dog died at 16. She used to bark to come in from the garden. She had a distinctive bark. I heard it even after she passed. Weirdest thing is our neighbor said that she thought she heard her bark too. I was either home alone or last to bed. When I was turning off the kitchen light, I heard someone say, "Good night, good night." Last of all, we got another dog. One night we were all just chilling on the sofa, and suddenly the dog jumped up, ran to the bottom of the stairs, and started barking at something at the top. I'm talking hackles up, vicious barking. There was no one or nothing there to trick his vision. I decided to go investigate. My mom was sensible and stayed in the living room. I'd be the first to die in a horror movie. I tried to get the dog to follow. He wouldn't. Sadly, we got forced out of that house several years ago. I miss it in some ways. Hope the new family learned to cope with the strange goings-on. That house got me used to the paranormal, though. In the house we moved into after, I heard footsteps in an empty room. I didn't even react. So I grew up in Sunnyvale, California in the early 2000s, and I loved going to our city's Toys R Us as a kid. However, there were always rumors about it being haunted. I remember some kids at my elementary school telling stories about how boxes would inexplicably be pushed off the shelves by a ghost. I always thought it was just kids telling stories to try to scare each other. I never thought much of it and considered it an urban legend, since nothing paranormal had ever happened to me in that store. But when I was about 13 years old, I had a strange experience in that Toys R Us. It made me change my mind about the whole legend being a hoax. On the day in question, my family was going to Toys R Us because my little brother wanted to buy something. My best friend and I decided to go too because we hadn't been to that store in years. While we were waiting for my little brother to find the toy he wanted, my friend and I were exploring through the aisles in the store, messing around and having fun with toys. Finally, we reached the back of the store, and by this time we were bored with looking at toys, so we just stood in an aisle and talked. Eventually, the topic of the store being haunted was brought up, and while we were talking about it, a box suddenly flew off the shelf behind my friend, almost hitting her in the back of the head. This was pretty freaky, especially since we'd just been talking about this Toys R Us being supposedly haunted. We weren't too scared at this point, though, since this could easily be explained by the box not being placed on the shelf very well and falling off due to gravity. Although I did remember seeing the box before it fell off the shelf, and I remembered it looking like it was pretty stable. But we just brushed this off and continued talking. However, a few moments later, the lights that were hanging from the ceiling above us began violently shaking back and forth. My friend and I stared up at the ceiling, frozen in shock. After a few seconds, the lights stopped shaking, and we both stared at each other like, what just happened? I started to feel more uneasy, but the incident with the lights could technically also be explained by something normal. The area where we were had a second floor above it, which I think was for staff. So I tried to tell myself that someone must have been doing something on the floor above us and caused the lights to shake by accident. In any case, my friend and I moved to the next aisle over, just in case the lights might fall on us. The aisle we were in now had a lot of stuffed animal toys in it. Both of us were just standing there talking about the things that had just happened to us when a toy monkey on the shelf next to us began moving all on its own and making a creepy laughing sound. We both stared at it in disbelief. Then we stared at each other and started screaming. We sprinted out of the store as fast as we could. But once we got outside, we couldn't just leave because we had to wait for my brother to finish buying his toy. We waited in the parking lot and tried to rationalize what had just happened. We talked about it and decided that the monkey toy could have been one of those motion-activated toys, and so we must have set the toy's motion sensor off somehow. But we didn't know this for sure. So my friend and I somehow worked up the courage to go back into the store and inspect the monkey toy to see if it was really motion-activated. We carefully studied the toy, read its packaging, but there was nothing that mentioned it was motion-activated. The only way you could make the monkey move and talk was if you pressed a button on its body. There was no way that we could have pressed that button by accident. When we realized it truly went off all by itself, we started screaming all over again and ran out of the store for the last time. I'm a pretty skeptical person, but after having 3 weird things in a row happen to me in that store, it felt like it was more than a coincidence. If you look up the store online, you'll find news articles about it being haunted. I think a paranormal investigator type show was even filmed there once. The store was permanently closed in 2018 and was replaced by an REI. But I always wonder if people are still having paranormal experiences there. To preface, me, my husband, and my in-laws have been stuck living in a hotel temporarily. A few days ago, I had horrible menstrual cramps, and I was feeling extremely fatigued. Getting up was exhausting and painful, and this was after 9 hours of working that day. I was overheating, so I mustered the energy to open the window. As it's a bottom-floor hotel window, there's a perpendicular bar that you need to adjust to allow the window to slide open. It's impossible to open from the outside due to this, in addition to guaranteed damages to the screen if somebody tried. Well, after about an hour, I got up and closed it. I didn't take the time to secure the bar again, and instead waited for my husband to come in, and I asked him to fix it. I watched him secure the bar and lock the window. I didn't leave my room at all that night. My side of the bed is right next to the window. Lo and behold, we kept waking up all night freezing. We both thought the window was closed, so I didn't get up to check it until about 4 a.m. It was open, about 4 inches, and the bar was secured in that position. I closed it and went back to bed without thinking much of it. Next day, I communicated it to my husband, and he mentioned that he didn't touch it again after that. Neither did I. There's no reason it should have been open. We both thought it was strange, but we didn't speculate anything. Come to find out after work the next day, my mother-in-law has been seeing figures standing next to the window in her room and in the corner of her room when she wakes up from naps. She hasn't mentioned it to avoid distressing me or my husband. But when my husband brought up our window to her, she told him about it and asked him not to tell me. He told me anyway. This was pretty interesting to hear, as I haven't felt creeped out by this hotel at all. Whatever's in here with us, it's not actually bothering anyone. Apparently, it was just too hot, and it wanted the window open. So when I was 12, my mom and I decided at the last minute to go do something fun for New Year's Eve. I was just starting to get into a kind of emo phase, so I wore a long black dress, small pearl necklace with a skull, black tights and shoes and a cardigan. And to be honest, I looked like a small child playing dress-up, not an adult by any stretch. So we go to a small pub that her friends own in town. I waited outside near the guard while she checked if it was all right for a kid to come in. In this short time that I stood looking through my phone, I noticed a man, dark brown toupee-like hair, quite short, at least 50, stood next to me and was sidestepping closer. I kept shuffling away and he keeps pursuing. Eventually, he awkwardly steps in front and waves and says,
Hi.
Obviously, I'm creeped out, but as an anxiously polite kid, I greet him back. And he doesn't even seem drunk. It goes like this.
So, where have you been tonight?
Nowhere.
Ah, okay. Going anywhere?
No, my mother's inside.
Ah, I see. Have you done any dancing tonight?
No.
Would you like to?
No, not really. Thankfully, my mother comes outside at this point, and I retreat without another word. We stand at the back of the long bar for an hour or so, and I keep noticing him creeping up to the bar over this hour. I told my mom, who found it odd but laughable. Eventually, he's right by us, and we're leaving. He barges towards me and says,
I didn't catch your name.
I tell him I did not say my name, and I don't want to. And he says something about keeping him guessing. My mother and the owner are saying, she's 12, mate. She's 12. And he's just laughing it away and says,
Well, when you'd like to be honest about your age, there's a glass of wine for you at the bar.
Extremely creepy encounter for me. Kept me awake at night for a long time. I was worried that he'd followed me somehow and was just waiting, watching. I hope this wasn't phrased so it seems like my mother was being inattentive. She left me by the guard, who could have easily made this guy shove off. I was just very shy and chose not to bother him. Since using a Ouija board, I've had extreme sleep paralysis and objects moving. Firstly, I need to say I'm not sure how I feel about the paranormal. I've had a lot of experiences, but I've tried to believe that it's not real, due to being scared to believe in it 100%. I'm a 23-year-old female, and when I was a child, I saw a lot of stuff. I had a music box that would regularly play for me without twisting it, which was given to me by my dead grandma. Also, my brother was sleeping one day on the top bunk, and a book somehow fell on his face. Yet, there was no bookshelf or anything around or above him, so it must have been thrown or something. He also said that he saw a dead girl on top of his wardrobe when he woke up screaming one night. He must have been around 6 years old. When I was a young girl, I had a China doll that my mom won from the fair. Sounds typical, I know. One day I woke up and the China doll was on my chest, when I knew that I'd put it at the end of the bed on the dresser. So my brother and I smashed it up. We were traumatized. I was so scared by all of the stuff that had happened, I had to see a counselor. Because I was petrified, I forgot to mention, I also heard a scream from under my bed. And one day, me and my brother slept in the living room, and we heard heavy breathing. We both held our breath and realized it was something else. We ran upstairs into our parents' room. Also, I'm not sure if this is relevant or helps, but we have traveler's blood in our family. My mom's mom was a witch and did readings or something. Unfortunately, she turned into an alcoholic, so my mom was adopted as a very young baby. So she doesn't know much about her, and she was brought up differently. We're not travelers or anything. I could write an entire post about this, but my mom was literally able to predict her stepmom's death and has dreams about accidents that have happened. The other day, she dreamt someone wearing red got hit by a scooter. And that same day, we drove past a serious scooter accident where the injured was wearing a red top, just like she dreamt about. Also, if she's ever cursed people, they've died, so she doesn't do that anymore. I've had dreams and have started to predict things lately too, but I like to think that all of this is just coincidence. However, lately, I'm questioning that belief. Anyways, a few years ago when I was 18, I decided to try using a Ouija board in my house with my brother and with my mom's permission. We didn't do it for long, and I know it was stupid. Apparently we got through to something, and it said that it had been watching me since I was a child. But I just assumed my brother was playing a prank on me, so we stopped. I kid you not. That same week, I started getting sleep paralysis, and for 4 years, I get it almost every day. When I get sleep paralysis, it feels like it's something evil, usually the same thing or multiple different things. 60% of the time, I'm being touched or assaulted. It also whispers things to me, and it can be really horrible or sometimes really nice. I wake up drenched in sweat because it can be that scary. I feel it's taken a toll on my mental health, my overall sleep. Also, when I've seen it, It looks like a long, tall, black figure with long nails. I'm writing this post because the other day, not only did I have sleep paralysis, but I awakened to my chandelier moving, and it freaked the shit out of me. I had no windows open or anything, so what the fuck was that? Also, I've woken up to hearing other things move. If I've invited something into my house, or I've had something attached to me all of my life, how do I get rid of it? I'm scared. What should I do? During my time at university, I had a part-time job at a huge Bavarian company. The building had 8 floors in a quadratic shape, with a big lobby in the center of the building. It actually was hundreds of years old, but completely renovated. I worked once or twice a week, mainly on weekends. Now here's the interesting part. I worked the night shifts, and my job was basically to walk around the whole building twice a night. While walking the hallways, I just had to watch for stuff that people forgot when they'd rush into the weekend. Open doors, open windows, or light switches still turned on. Nothing out of the ordinary. The payment was also good. In fact, I was kind of surprised about how good the payment was, because obviously I didn't have to do much in those 8 hours. My girlfriend and other friends mentioned that the payment is just fair, as I had to walk around a huge building at night, completely alone. They always mentioned how they would never do this, as the sinister feeling in the buildings like these play mind games with them. I never had problems with being alone. I was neither paranoid or believed in paranormal occurrences. Just studied throughout the night and did my 2 walks. Until this one night in September of 2018. The shift started like any other. I got the keys from the janitor and started studying after my first walkthrough of the building. Between 3:55 a.m. and 4:05 a.m., the whole electric system throughout the building resets, which I found really odd at my first shift, but I grew to ignore it after some months. The janitor explained the reason after I'd asked. The reset leads to light sources turning on and off throughout the whole building, systematically, but still chaotic. I sat at the front desk, not even paying attention to it, when suddenly a certain noise reached me. One of the 2 elevator doors in the first floor opened itself, closed itself, and opened itself again. Malfunction, I thought, going back to reading boring scientific papers. About 20 minutes later, it happened again, but this time, the light in the elevator switched off, which seemed really off. At this point, I started to feel a little bit alarmed. When I moved into the elevator, the door behind me closed. I panicked and tried to get out of the elevator, but the elevator already started to take me to the 2nd floor, in complete darkness. When I reached the 2nd floor, the door opened and I basically fell out of the elevator door, turning around while I fell. The really sinister-looking, completely dark elevator closed again and took off to another floor. My heart was racing, and a part of me thought that someone manipulated the console, but another part of me felt something else. Fear. I had goosebumps all over my body and returned to the front desk, with the plan to text my supervisor and the janitor about the technical defect of the elevator. I did this with trembling hands when I suddenly heard another distant noise. Radio music from somewhere in the canteen. I slowly moved to the canteen with my smartphone light switched on. The noise came from the kitchen, and I followed it. Reaching the kitchen, I saw that a radio was playing music on one of the tables. The cooks listen to this while they're working. I froze and couldn't breathe. During my first walk, the janitor texted me, told me to put the radio under a certain desk and switch it off, as the cooks would always store it there. I did this directly when I started the shift, even texting him, because I couldn't find the desk at first, after unplugging the radio. I turned around and I sprinted through the canteen, directly to an exit, and I waited outside for the last 2 hours. Luckily, I had the keys with me when someone for the day shift came. When he arrived, I went into the building with him, took my bag, and left quickly. I called in sick for the next 2 weeks. After that, I quit the job, using excuses regarding my sleep cycle. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. When I was 13, my parents sent me to rehab. When you're that age, you can only go for so long. But I was there long enough to learn something pretty nuts. Part of the reason I struggled with substances was because my parents had a tendency to not believe the things I would tell them. I didn't really realize that this was the problem at the time or before rehab, but it was. Them not believing me about things that I was sure happened or I was sure were real really fucked with me. Where I come from and where I was, it's not very populated, so the chances that I would run into somebody I knew or that knew things about where I lived was pretty likely. On the first day I was there, and I'd learned it would be every Monday, you'd break out into these little mini groups. They were picked at random, and you didn't really have a choice. In these mini groups, you would have counseling sessions or group talk, open chat. I actually don't remember what they called it. I just remember there was one rule: honesty. Just tell the truth. So it's my first day there, and I decide I'm going to sit back and listen. Most people shared mild things, a couple more serious things. There were people there that definitely needed to be there more than I did. But there was one girl, when it was her turn to share. She started talking about something, and I was actually interested. Basically, my parents are the worst. A couple of years ago, they refused to believe me about something I was seeing outside my window. Yeah, I definitely saw it. And my sister's missing now, so yeah, they're basically the worst. It was when she talked about something outside our window. That's what caught my attention. But also the part about her sister. Obviously, that was really sad. I knew that I needed to talk to this girl more. She didn't really want to talk to me, though. So I had to wait for the next time that we were going to have that group session, and I just had to hope that I'd randomly get paired with her again. Well, I did. And when I did, I started talking about my story. Something that my parents did that upset me. The time that I saw somebody outside my window. The time that somebody tried to take me from my room, and they didn't believe me. He was dressed like a clown, I said out loud. A couple of people in the room laughed, but she looked right at me, and I knew she'd seen exactly what I'd seen. I think we got more validation out of meeting each other than anything else. So, I'm grateful for the experience, but I'd be lying if I said I forgave my parents. Because I don't, really. They never really did anything to help me outside of sending me to rehab. If anything, they just made things worse. But I got a real friend out of the deal, and I like to think that she feels the same way. Anyways, thanks for listening. I tried to search floating napkin-like object on Google, but I just kept getting crafting recommendations for Halloween. Something really odd just occurred, and I'd like to share with all of you. Maybe one of you has seen something similar. We live in a nice suburban home built in the late 1960s. We bought it about 3 years ago, and when we first moved in, we'd see a large, brown-colored, shadow-like figure near our stairs. They were never bothersome, but we were stern and said to leave us alone. Our first daughter was born less than a month after we moved in. Sometimes, quite frequently actually, odd things happen, and we just try to think logically about it. I must have left the lights on, even though I think I turned them off. That kind of thing. I'll spare you a recent unsafe thing that happened since it doesn't pertain to what I just witnessed. The other thing happened to my wife and daughter, and again, we seem to have rationalized it. But here's what I saw. I'm lying in my bed and cuddling with my 3-year-old. She had an upset stomach last night after some medication we gave her, and she'd woken up about 30 minutes later than usual. She was tired and wanted to watch YouTube Kids on my phone. My wife went to the restroom and walked out to wash her hands, leaving the light to the bathroom area on while the sink area was unlit. I rolled over to look in that direction, and I saw a napkin-like object floating above the bathroom door. This is the best way I can describe it. It was flat, but probably had the thickness of a napkin. It was square-like, but was floating just above the door. It looked like it was falling down slowly, only to be blown back upwards by the gentlest of breezes. My glasses were on. I could see it plain as day. It was probably white, though that's also the color of the wall. It had a shadowish effect on the wall that it was near. I called out to my wife and said, "What the hell is that?" She came around the corner and turned off the light in the bathroom. I told her to turn the light back on, and it was gone. We've spent the last 30 minutes trying to recreate the situation with lights and activities and positioning. Nothing. I want to think logically about this before saying it was paranormal. For those who have seen the paranormal before, does anything of this shape, texture, movement, or anything else sound familiar? I've always felt inclined towards the spiritual side of life. Maybe that's why in my adult life I'm a pagan and practice witchcraft. Most of the stories of the house I grew up in happened before I started to dabble into the unknown, though I've always been careful in only having and promoting good energy. The short incident I'm going to tell you about, in my mind at least, isn't menacing or evil at all. Just a little nod at the strange things going on, and more confirms on a physical level that all was not as it seemed. I grew up on a kind of busy street in a kind of major city in Western Canada. I lived there with my parents and brother, even though he was much older and moved out when I was little. We had a main level and a nice redone basement in addition to a yard and a 2-car garage. Since I could remember, like 2 or 3 years old, Before I entered the garage, I would knock 3 times before me or anyone else would open it. I didn't make a huge production out of it like I do most things, but it was just something I felt inclined to do. When my mom would ask me, "Why do you do that?" I would say, "So the children who live in there can hide before we come inside." Now, something you need to know is that not only am I not that old, young adult at best, but I have the memory of a freaking elephant. I can tell you things that happened 15 years ago, as if we're watching an HD movie. So, unlike little kids who say creepy things and don't remember, I remember why I said it, why I believed that. As a very visual person, when my mom asked me that, I had a very clear image in my head, one I'd been referring back to every time I knocked. I could see, like I was there, the same shadow-like looking children. They'd be running around having fun until I'd knock so they could stow away and not be seen. If I knew then what I know now about my visions, I probably would have been more freaked out. But to be honest, I was pretty chill about it. Of course, that's not the end. So I grow up, I still knock, every single time, until I don't. Again, I remember the day exactly. Normal tween day. I'm fighting with my mom before school, so I rush into the garage without a knock and plunk into the passenger seat to wait for my mom to drive. She's kind of fast behind me, and we notice at the same time that something small and pinkish is on the hood of the car. It's small, but totally noticeable. From where I was, I thought it was a dead bird. I screamed at my mom not to touch it because I thought it was gross. She got out and retrieved whatever was on the hood. It was puzzling, but only for a moment. It was a small moose figurine or toy. It was resting on its side like it had been dropped without care. I was fucking freaked. This confirmed that the weird image of children playing in my garage that circled my mind when I knocked was true. Instantly, my mom was upset too. She totally thought it was me who had done it to freak her out. I had, of course, relayed to her over and over again my ideas about children. She kept the moose. I still live with her, and I'll attach a picture to the post. But here's where the bombshell really drops. I'm sitting in the same garage only about a year ago, partaking in the devil's lettuce with the same mother. Of course, in the time of venerability, moms recall the memories that will shock us the most. Out of the blue, we start talking about the crazy dude who lived in our house before us, and how, when he made any repairs, they were awful and half-assed. Then we're talking about the garage. I didn't even have time to bring up the moose before she says, "The dude who built this garage got really drunk one day, drove into a school bus, killing like 3 kids." What, Mom? It's not like I've talked about feeling the energy of children up here. I was able to find a little bit about it, and it only happened a short time after our place was built. It was a family business, so his energy was all up in there. Like I said earlier, I was less scared of the actual event then. This just put a lot into perspective. Well, friends, that's all the stories we have for tonight's episode. But be sure to join me every Friday night for a brand new one. I want to thank everyone for listening, and to those who shared their stories, thank you. A big welcome to my newest subscribers, And a shout out to the Darkest Hour's newest, super official patron, the Dark Cosmos. Don't forget to like this video, to subscribe to the Darkest Hour if you haven't already, and tap that bell so you never miss a thing. Keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour by following me on Instagram at the Darkest Hour YT and the Darkest Hour subreddit, the Darkest Hour YT. If you want to support the channel in other ways, consider becoming a patron. You'll see your name at the end of every video, like these amazing folks, early access to episodes, and much more. I've put a link in the description, so check it out. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com. Stay spooky.